Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the motion that stands in the name of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, on the order paper. And can I begin by paying tribute to our Prime Minister? She may temporarily have lost her voice, but what she has never lost and will never lose is a focus on the national interest and a full-hearted desire to do what is right for our country. The Prime Minister, since the withdrawal agreement was concluded, has stood at this dispatch box for more than 19 hours, answered many questions, made compelling arguments. She has, throughout this process, shown fortitude, tenacity, thoughtfulness, diligence, and above all, an unselfish and unstinting patriotism. I think it is only appropriate that on all sides of the House, whatever political differences we have, we recognise the way in which the Prime Minister always, always, always puts country first, and we are fortunate to have her in that position. Now, I won't at this stage. This House voted to give the people of this country a choice over whether or not we were to remain and leave the European Union. 17.4 million people, a clear majority, voted to leave. That is a mandate that we must respect and an instruction that we must deliver. It is also the case, and just one second, it is also the case that at the last general election, both principal parties stood on manifestos that pledged them to deliver our departure from the European Union. It is vitally important that we honour that manifesto promise, those instructions, and our democracy. And those outside this House who sent us here to act on their will and to deliver that mandate will take a very, very dim view of those who seek to frustrate, deny or dilute the mandate that we were given. Absolutely. And I'm more than happy to give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Would he agree with me that the successful Vote Leave campaign, of which he was part, made clear during the referendum campaign that one of its primary objectives in winning the campaign would be to deliver an exit from the EU with a deal in an orderly fashion?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I should also take this opportunity to pay tribute to his consistent championing of the right of EU citizens in this country. We admire his commitment to principle, but it is the case that the Vote Leave campaign made clear that it was seeking a mandate to leave the European Union and to conclude a free trade deal with the EU. That was the explicit aim of the campaign, and it is the policy of this government, and I'm happy to give way to the right honourable gentleman.
Might I suggest that if we do wish to get an orderly Brexit around the Prime Minister's deal, one way of doing that will be to invite him and his colleagues to vote for the motion by the member for Meriden, which will take off the table a crashing out of the European Union, which will maybe convince some of his friends that that is no longer an option, and that if we are to deliver on our promise, the only way we deliver on our promise is the Prime Minister's deal, and might he consider when we will have another opportunity, when we're not going to crash out, of considering voting on the Prime Minister's deal again.
The right honourable gentleman, like me, argued that we should leave the European Union, and I take seriously the case that he makes. And I will go on to say a little bit about the amendment that stands in the name of my right honourable friend, the member for Meriden. But one thing that we should all be clear, one thing we should all be clear about, is that the only way to ensure that we take no deal off the table is either to revoke Article 50, which would dishonour the mandate, or to deliver a deal, and, as the right honourable gentleman knows, the deal that the Prime Minister put before this House last night, which sadly did not command a majority, allows us to leave the European Union in an orderly fashion in a way that honours the democratic mandate and also preserves our economic advantages. And it is much, much to the regret of people outside this House that we were not able to command a consensus for it there. I'm happy to give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. He seems to be making a speech about last night's debate rather than tonight's. the debate we are having today is about a no deal. Can he imagine, Troy spent a lot of time imagining being the Prime Minister, can he imagine if he was the Prime Minister coming to the House and having a vote of this importance and the government not having an opinion whether their own members should vote for it or against it?
Well, the honourable gentleman has a wonderful cheek in saying that I was speaking about the events of last night when he sought to intervene on me in the very first second of my own speech. Perhaps he has pretensions to clairvoyance. I have none, so I do not know what my right honourable friend will ask me.
Sadly, in his undoubted wisdom, the Speaker did not select Amendment G in my name, which instructs the government to keep no deal on the table during negotiations with the EU. Will my right honourable friend confirm that it is still the policy of Her Majesty's government to keep no deal on the table? Otherwise, how will we get a better deal?
Well, my right honourable friend makes an important point. The motion which stands in my right honourable friend the Prime Minister's name and which I will vote for this evening makes it clear that we do not believe that we should leave on March the 29th without a withdrawal agreement. But it does not take the option of no deal off the table, because, as I underlined earlier, the only way in which that can be done comprehensively is either through revocation or agreement to a deal. And my right honourable friend wished to make a point.
I voted to leave the referendum. My honourable friend led the campaign. There is going to be a choice in the end for this House between the Prime Minister's vision of the Brexit, which I support, and the Leader of the Opposition's vision. The Leader of the Opposition's vision is to stay in the customs union, to remain in the single market, and to continue to have free movement of people. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that that in no sense honours the spirit of the referendum vote to leave the European Union?
Well, my honourable friend makes an admirable point, and I note that the Leader of the Opposition is not in his place today. I note also that in the point of order that he made last night, he didn't refer to the newly adopted policy of embracing a second referendum, which is now Labour's position. So to add to the incoherence of the Labour Party's position in saying that they want to be in a customs union and in a single market and indeed to accept free movement, they also want to overturn the promise that they had made to honour the referendum mandate and not to bring forward a second referendum. In their naked pursuit of political advantage, I'm afraid that the Labour frontbench are letting this country down and, more importantly, letting their voters down. Now, I want to make a little bit of progress and I will accept more interventions in due course. But as a result of the House's failure to agree to the deal that the Prime Minister presented last night, we now face a number of unattractive choices. And it is important that the House realises that all of these choices are less attractive than support for the deal that the Prime Minister negotiated. We can choose as a House to leave without a deal. But there are significant economic, political and constitutional challenges if we do embark on that course, which I will go into in just a second. We could accept a deal, not yet, we could accept a deal less attractive than that which the Prime Minister secured. And as my honourable friend, the member for Harborough, pointed out, it is the case that there are many people in this House who would have us leave the European Union in a way that does not honour the referendum mandate and does not honour the manifesto promises at the last general election. Doing that would not only circumscribe this country's sovereign right to make decisions in its own interest, it would also undermine and further erode faith in democracy. But if we're talking about eroding faith in democracy, then either frustrating the vote altogether by revoking Article 50 or seeking to overturn it with a second referendum, those would be choices of far greater magnitude and, to my mind, far more damaging. And I'm very happy to give way to the Right Honourable Lady.
The Right Honourable Gentleman from giving way. The cat's now out of the bag, Mr. Speaker. On his own admission, this motion does not take no deal off the table. Why? Now, Mr. Speaker, I'll be guided by you. But my understanding was that at the dispatch box, this House was given a guarantee that today we would have the opportunity to take no deal off the table. Could the honourable gentleman not only confirm that, Mr. Speaker, but also inform us of this? Is it the case that the government is offering a free vote on the amendment that Mr. Speaker has called, which I believe is Amendment F, in the name of the Right Honourable Gentleman for Ashford, and yet it is whipping against the Amendment A laid in the name of the Right Honourable Lady from Meridian. An honourable gentleman and members opposite don't want to hear it, but it's a shameful carry-on when a former chairman of the Conservative Party is whipped against to the extent she will not push that amendment to the vote. This House will be denied the chance to take no deal off the table. That's the truth of it, isn't it?
The Right Honourable Lady is a distinguished criminal barrister. Now I know what it's like to be cross-examined by her. But I also understand why lawyers are paid by the hour. I'm going to make a...
Point of order, Anna Soubry.
Mr. Speaker, it's debatable as to whether I was ever a distinguished member of the bar, but I can tell the Right Honourable Gentleman, as a member of the criminal bar, we were never paid by the hour when I was at the bar. In fact, repeatedly, I worked pro bono, as many criminal barristers have to do, under his cuts.
Well, the Right Honourable Lady has put the facts on the record. I don't think we get into the subject of who's been remunerated, how much, whether for legal work or penning articles in newspapers or whatever. I don't think we should get into that. That's just focused on the terms of the debate. And actually, I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, in his own interests, the less said about that matter, the better. The Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I believe, as a former Lord Chancellor, that is what is known as a refresher. But thank you. Not at this stage. Not at this stage. Oh, yes, to the full House.
Just to clarify briefly the point which is concerning the Right Honourable Member for Roxton, can the Minister confirm it is the Government's position that we are ruling out leaving on March the 29th with absolutely no arrangements at all?
Yes.
We are ruling out the complete collapse of all our legal and trading arrangements with the continent which we've built up over the last 50 years.
Yes, and I wouldn't use exactly the same language as the Father of the House, but his point is correct. The motion commits the government not to leave on the March the 29th without a withdrawal agreement. I hope that is clear and unambiguous. But the motion also makes clear that the default position in law is that we do leave the European Union unless we can secure assent to a withdrawal agreement, which is why, as I mentioned earlier, it was so disappointing that we did not secure a mandate last night. I will give way, first of all, to the Right Honourable Gentleman, and then to my Right Honourable learned friend.
Could he now attempt to answer the question of the Honourable Member for Broxtowe and explain the media reports? Given the Prime Minister last night promised free votes on her, yes, she did, at the dispatch box, free votes, yes, don't shake his head, free votes at the dispatch box last night. Can he explain the reports that she has quoted, that the amendment in the name of the Honourable Member for Ashford will be a free vote on the Conservative benches, but the amendment in the name of the Honourable Member for Meriden will be whipped against? That is an absolute disgrace and a bad faith to this House.
If only the Labour Party would give its own members a free vote, then we could find out what they really think.
I'm most grateful to my right honourable friend. It seems to me that the difficulty which may be arising across the House is this. If the House passes this motion this evening, and I have no reason not to support the motion in the terms of ruling out no deal, it must of course follow from that in order to achieve that, two things have to happen. Firstly, we need to get an extension to Article 50, and secondly, we were going to have to make a change to primary legislation in the Withdrawal Agreement Act. And I assume that the government is undertaking, if this motion is passed in its own terms, that it will do exactly that.
I'm very grateful, actually, to my Right Honourable and learned friend for his point, because it does allow me to underline and further elucidate the point. It is absolutely correct. Tomorrow, the House will have an opportunity, if the motion passes tonight, to decide how to seek an extension. Obviously, an extension is not something that we can insist upon and automatically see delivered. It is in the gift of the EU, and it requires the assent of all 27 other EU members. But, of course, there will be an opportunity further to debate that tomorrow. Now, I want to stress. I will give way. Oh, of course, sorry. Yes, of course.
There was a second part to the question which is equally critical, which is that we are going to have, the government will have to bring statutory instrument to this House to alter the departure date set out in the EU Withdrawal Act, and I assume the government is undertaking in those circumstances to do exactly that.
The Prime Minister and others have said that previously, and I'm happy to place once again on the record at this dispatch box exactly that commitment. Now, I do want to make a little bit of progress, but there will be time for others to intervene. I am conscious also that many members do want to speak. 40 members. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I stressed earlier that if we do choose to leave without a deal on March the 29th, there will be economic, political and constitutional challenges that this country will face. Now, we are a great country. We would get through it. We would, in due course, ensure that this country was more prosperous, freer and successful. And of course, government has been working hard in order to ensure that we can be prepared for any eventuality and we can mitigate the risks of leaving without a deal. And can I, at this stage, pay particular tribute to civil servants across government who've been working exceptionally hard and with great skill in order to ensure that we are ready for any eventuality. We don't often enough pay tribute to civil servants in this House. I'm sure that across this House, everyone will recognise how important their work is. But I stress that work is work to mitigate the challenges. If we were to leave on March the 29th without a withdrawal agreement, we would be treated as a third country by the European Union. And that would mean that we would face tariffs on many of our products. And I'm acutely aware that some of the highest and most severe tariffs will be imposed on food. We would face, our sheep farmers and beef farmers would face, if we left on March the 29th, the instant imposition of tariffs of at least 40%, in some cases more than 100%. Their livelihoods, and indeed the economic and social health of our countryside, would face very, very challenging circumstances. None of us can be blithe or blasé about those challenges. More than that, I'm happy to give way in just a second, but I just want to complete this section of the argument. It is also the case that we know that there are at least 145,000 businesses in this country that trade with the EU and, of course, do commerce in the UK, but don't trade outside the EU. As soon as we become a third country, they will need to register with HMRC in order to ensure that their trade can continue. They need, at least 145,000 of them, to secure the ORE numbers and the other documentation necessary to trade. At the time of speaking, only around 50,000 of those 145,000 businesses have made those preparations. So that means a significant number of businesses in this country, when we are just over a fortnight away from the prospect of leaving without a deal, do not have the wherewithal, the means and the appropriate documentation in order to be able to carry on trade. On top of that, it is also the case that as well as customs and other checks, products of animal origin, if they're exported to the European Union, need to be checked at a border inspection post for sanitary and phytosanitary checks. A significant amount of our food produce goes through the narrow straits and crosses from Dover to Calais or goes through Eurotunnel. It is the case that at the moment, at the time of speaking, there is no border inspection post at either of those ports. Now, of course, there are many things that this government can do to mitigate the consequences of no deal. But we cannot dictate what the EU's tariffs will be. We cannot instruct the port authorities in France how to order their affairs. We cannot compel businesses to acquire the means necessary in order to trade in the way that they have been doing. All of these are cumulative costs that businesses would face in the event of a no-deal exit on March the 29th. I'm delighted to give way to my dear friend.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way, and he's right that the European Union does not have border infrastructure in place to do the border inspection checks that he mentions. But is that why perhaps they've asked us to dynamically align our regulations for a period of 9 months, so that they don't have to carry out those checks during that period? Quite right.
Yeah. And it's right that, but dynamic alignment for those 9 months would mean being a rule taker during that period. It is also the case, of course, that while there would be dynamic alignment which would allow us to be registered as a third country, it would also be the case that there would be SPS checks on a variety of products. I'm very happy to give way. Oh yes, of course, the honourable gentleman.
Grateful to the Secretary for giving way. He speaks as though there is some distance between him and the tragedy that he's just outlined. But isn't it the case that he is the author, a senior author of the tragedy he has just outlined? Doesn't he feel any sense of shame and any sense of responsibility? And shouldn't he apologise for the mess that we are facing?
It's the responsibility of those who voted against the withdrawal agreement last night. If the Scottish National Party had a care for Scotland's industry, Scotland's prosperity and Scotland's farmers, they would have voted for the withdrawal agreement last night. But I'm afraid when it comes to political positioning and separatist posturing rather than serious politics, there is no equal to the ranks of the Scottish National Party. I'm happy to give way to the honourable.
Thank my right honourable friend for giving way once again. He may not be aware, but the authorities at Calais say to me that they will in fact have a border inspection post open at the end of the month. And can I urge his department to work with my port and with the community in Dover, because they want us to have a border inspection post just outside the port, just like they do in places like Rotterdam, but the unfortunately restricted position of DEFRA means that they're trying to say it has to be inside the port, which it doesn't. Can he get his department to be more flexible?
Yeah. My department has been flexible, and it will continue to be flexible, and we will continue to do everything possible in order to facilitate trade. But as my honourable friend points out, that border inspection post, that it could be in place by the end of the month, and we hope it will be in place by the end of the month, is not in place now. And I'm very happy to give way to my honourable friend, the member for North Dorset.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary for giving way. He knows, as I do, just how important, Mr. Speaker, agriculture is to this country and the jobs that it creates and all that it adds to biodiversity and our environment. Would you agree with my assessment that any right honourable and honourable member who purports to either A, understand or B, support farming in their constituencies can in no way support leaving the European Union without a deal?
Obviously there are a diversity of views in this House, but I do agree with my honourable friend that it is in the interest, and this is one of the reasons why I'm making the arguments at this dispatch box now, it is in the interests of British farming and indeed our broader environment that we do not leave on March the 29th without a deal. Now I'm going to make a little bit more progress. There are also political challenges in leaving on March the 29th without a deal. As my honourable friend, the member for South Leicestershire, pointed out, during the referendum campaign, we argued that we should leave with a deal. I'm also conscious that while the mandate that we had was clear, it was also the case that with a 52-48 result, we do need to take account of the hopes and concerns of those people who did not vote to leave the European Union. And the Prime Minister's deal does that. More than that, there have been many people who voted Remain, including in this House, including colleagues of mine in my party and in other parties, who accept the result and wish us to leave and to honour that mandate. But they do not want us to leave on March the 29th without a deal. It would inevitably be the case that there would be political strains and pressures consequent on leaving on March the 29th without a deal, which none of us as ministers can afford to ignore. More than that, it is also important to stress that there are significant constitutional challenges as well. It is the case, as a number of members have pointed out, that a majority of voters in Scotland voted to remain in the European Union, and a majority of voters in Northern Ireland did. But we voted as one united kingdom, and we voted to leave. It is striking that since that vote, support for the Union in Scotland has risen. Well, I think we only need to look at the ranks of Scottish Conservative MPs. who turfed out the partitionist part-timers of the SNP to see which way the tide was flowing, and they don't like it up them. I'm more than happy to give way to the Honourable Lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful indeed to the Secretary of State for giving way. The Secretary of State will be well aware, as will other members, that we have not had a functioning Assembly in Northern Ireland for over 2 years. We have had no ministers in Northern Ireland for over 2 years. And so this House must give due weight, including members of the DUP must give due weight to the warning, the serious warning that was issued last week by the head of the Northern Ireland Civil Service, David Stirling, of the grave consequences for Northern Ireland if there is a no-deal Brexit.
The Honourable Lady, for whom I have enormous respect, is absolutely 100% totally right. Now, of course, it is up to this House to take that decision, but it is the case, whatever the position in Scotland, and I do believe that if we left without a deal, it would impose additional pressures on our precious union. It is also the case that there would be particular pressures, particular pressures if we left without a deal on March the 29th in Northern Ireland. As the Honourable Lady points out, Northern Ireland has been without a devolved government for 2 years now. And in the absence of the Stormont institutions, we have introduced legislation and guidance from my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, which empowers Northern Ireland civil servants, including the wholly estimable David Stirling, to continue to take decisions which are in the public interest. Now, that arrangement is sustainable at the moment, but of course, it is the sincere hope of myself, my colleagues in government, and I believe almost everyone across the House, that we can restore the Northern Ireland executive. But it is not at this point. But it is also clear that the current situation with no executive would be very, very difficult to sustain in the uniquely challenging context of a no-deal exit. Now, we, in the circumstances that the House has voted for no deal, would have to start formal engagement with the Irish government about further arrangements for providing strengthened decision-making in the event of that outcome. And that would include the very real possibility of imposing a form of direct rule. Now, that is a grave step, and experience shows us that it is very hard to return from that step, and it would be especially difficult in the context of no deal. Of course.
Very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way, but he will be aware of the written ministerial statement of the Northern Ireland Secretary today, which affords frictionless trade to the Republic of Ireland in terms of tariffs and in terms of no checks. If that can be the basis of no deal, why can't that be the basis of a deal?
Well said.
It is the case that my right honourable friend has issued a written statement, and it is the case that those provisions seek to minimise the consequences of no deal. But it is a temporary arrangement. It could potentially be open in the future to legal challenge. It is, to put it at its highest, a sub-optimal arrangement. It is a reflection of the hard work of the Northern Ireland Civil Service and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, that we will do everything we can to minimise frictions and checks at the border in order to underpin the importance of both commerce and peace on the island of Ireland. But it is emphatically not an arrangement which any of us can look at and regard as one that is genuinely sustainable or ideal. I'd be very happy to give way, yes, to all of my honourable friends. First of all...
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and he is making a very clear case for why leaving without a deal at the end of this month brings such uncertainty. Could he give more clarity on how he sees the time could be used during an extension?
The House to decide tomorrow what type of extension it believes is appropriate. I think the most important thing that we can do is rally behind a withdrawal agreement which ensures that we can preserve not just the strength of our economy but also the gains of leaving the European Union. But it is also the case that civil servants, as I've indicated earlier, are working incredibly hard to make sure that we can mitigate all consequences. I will give way to the Right Honourable Lady in a second, not to those gentlemen, but first of all to these two.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way. The written ministerial statements bearing on tariffs tabled this morning are very welcome, and in particular the zero tariff for goods travelling north-south on the island of Ireland. But what discussion has he had with Dublin in relation to tariffs for goods travelling south-north? Because he will appreciate, given the importance of agri-food in Northern Ireland, the potential grave disadvantage in the event of no deal for agriculture in Northern Ireland.
My right honourable friend makes a very important point. Of course, I talked to Michael Creed, the Minister responsible, but it is the case that there are additional challenges that agriculture and food processing in Northern Ireland would face in the event of a no-deal scenario on March the 29th. And I'm going to give way to the member for East Surrey and then the right honourable member for Pontefract and Castleford. Yes.
My right honourable friend is being incredibly generous with his time. The overwhelming view of business is that no deal should be taken off the table. And given that those of us on this benches know that our party's success and our country's success is based on backing the job creators and the wealth creators, how does he think the Conservative Party of the 1980s would look at our response to business at the moment?
Well, I think I'm fortunate enough to speak in this House after Chancellor of the Exchequer gave a spring statement in which he underlined the fact that this country has had the longest period of uninterrupted growth of any G20 economy, that we have a faster-growing economy, we're predicted to have a faster-growing economy than Italy, Germany and Japan, and it is also the case that we have a record number of people in work and real wages are rising. So under my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer's leadership and the Prime Minister's leadership, I think anyone nostalgic for the 80s would say that actually what we have once more are economic success delivered by a Conservative government putting the national interest first. Happy to give way to the right honourable lady and then I will make some progress.
Thank the Secretary of State for giving way. And he is making a very strong argument against no deal and about the damage that it would cause. The purpose of having these votes today and tomorrow was to establish the default position that if we don't have a deal in place, and we don't have a deal with a majority behind it in this House in place, what will the default position be for on March the 29th? So could he please clarify, it's not clear from the motion, could he please clarify his position on this? If there is no deal in place by the 29th of March, does he agree that the default position cannot be to simply leave without a deal?
The motion today is designed to assert, and that's why I hope that people will support it. Now, I wanted to stress that in underlining all of these challenges, and by emphasising that we're doing everything we can to mitigate them, it is not the case, and I made this point earlier, and I just want to underline it for the benefit of all, it is not the case that we are taking no deal off the table. The only way that that can be done is either to revoke Article 50 and decide to stay in the European Union, or to conclude an agreement. That is an inescapable fact, and that is why we face a series of unattractive choices. And many of the alternatives that have been put forward would undoubtedly be worse. No. It is the case that the Labour Party is now committed to a second referendum, and indeed there's been no more impressive no more articulate advocate of that position than the honourable gentleman. No, nay, never.
Order. Well, the Secretary of State's made the position clear. Let me conduct the very briefest of tutorials for the benefit of the illustrious chair of the International Trade Select Committee of the House of Commons. It is unseemly, to the point of being disorderly, to try to speak one's intervention by mouthing it before permission has been given to undertake it. It is a point that is so blindingly obvious that, as I often observe, only an extraordinarily sophisticated person, possibly from Manhelian and Yar, could fail to grasp it. Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I'm so grateful you were in the chair. The Labour Party are now committed to a second referendum. But it is the case that many of their leading spokespeople had made clear what they thought of a second referendum in the past. The Shadow Education Secretary had said that it would be a mistake and would show a disdain for democracy. And indeed, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, the member for Islington South, when asked about a second referendum, said, no, we don't think that's right. If we went for a second referendum, we would be saying to people, we think you're stupid. We think you made the wrong decision. We're going to do something else. So, now that she embraces a second referendum, I'm afraid that the Honourable Lady, having sneered once at the flag of St George, now confirms that she wants to tell the British people that they are, in her view, wrong and stupid. That may be a view popular in Islington South. It is not the view of this government, who are determined to honour the votes of the British people and who will not dismiss their sovereign decision as either wrong or stupid. No. I'll tell you one thing that's worse than Jeremy Corbyn, and that's the prospect of an independent Scotland with the gaggle of, as I said earlier, part-time politicians in favour. But there is one thing that's better than Jeremy Corbyn, and that is the Honourable Gentleman.
I take compliments wherever I can find them, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State and the Prime Minister have said at the dispatch box previously and today that the House is very good at striking down things that are on the table, but very bad at putting forward alternatives. I've noticed in recent days that both of them have been doing exactly the same thing. They spend a lot of time striking down any other proposition that is mentioned from across the House. But the one they're sticking to has also been decisively struck down, more than any other, twice in historic proportions. If we carry on doing the same thing, we're going to get the same result. Is he suggesting that he's going to bring the bill back again and again and again, the deal, or is he going to suggest that he's going to show the leadership that is expected from somebody in his position and the Prime Minister's position and change course, listen to other propositions and engage with people who are trying to compromise?
Well, I said before that the Honourable Gentleman was better than Jeremy Corbyn, and he proved by his intervention that he's much, much better than Jeremy Corbyn. And I don't agree with him on everything, but I do think it's right that we have dialogue across this House. We are in an uncomfortable position. Now, I was a supporter, an enthusiastic supporter of the Prime Minister's deal. It commanded more votes last night than it did at the first time of presentation. But it did not command a majority in this House, absolutely. And that is why it is our responsibility, all of our responsibilities, yes, to listen, yes, to reflect, but also to recognise that none of us can dodge choices. And the choices in front of this House as a result of the decision not to endorse the Prime Minister's deal last night are unattractive. And I have laid out just how unattractive some of them are. There is another proposition that has been put forward.
Interrupting the right honourable gentleman, I hadn't heard, but I have now. Point of order, Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State has just made it clear that the government's intention is to keep putting the same deal back to the House over and over and over again, even though it's been decisively defeated twice now, possibly ad infinitum. Isn't that out of order?
There are historical precedents for the way in which such matters are regarded. I don't need to treat of them now, and no ruling is required now. There may be people who have an opinion about it. I'm not really preoccupied with that, but a ruling would be made about that matter at the appropriate time, and I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for reminding me that such a ruling might at some point in the future be required. Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In just a second. For the benefit of the Right Honourable Lady, I'm simply making clear that as a result of last night's vote, we face a series of unpalatable choices. Now, the government has put forward a motion tonight which I hope Right Honourable and Honourable members will support, and that would ensure that we do not leave on March 29th without a deal. But this House has to decide. It has to decide what it wants, and that is why I agreed with the Honourable Gentleman. This House has been very good at saying no, and insufficiently statesmanlike in supporting the Prime Minister in her efforts. It is now make your mind up time for this House. It is critical that members on all sides respond appropriately. No, but I will give way to the Chairman of the Exiting the European Union Select Committee.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. Can he explain to the House why it is democratic to keep bringing back to the House a proposition that has been overwhelmingly defeated on two occasions, on the one hand, But on the other hand, it is somehow undemocratic to suggest that the British people should be asked whether they want to change their mind.
I'd point out two things. The first is that the proposition that was put before the House last night was significantly different from the proposition that was put before the House beforehand. I think the honourable gentleman, the member for Brett North, taxes me about stupidity. I'll return to his comments in just a second. But the key thing is, it was different, but of course we didn't secure support for it. So the House now has to decide. But it is the case, and I respect the right honourable gentleman, as he knows very, very much, but it is the case that it was the official position of his front bench not to endorse a second referendum. They've done what might inelegantly be called a flip-flop or a U-turn, and I was merely pointing out to the House the nature of that flip-flop and U-turn. No. Oh, yes, of course, yes, absolutely.
My honourable friend is very kind. He keeps saying that if we reach March the 29th, we're not going to leave unless we have a deal, and then he's been considering the alternatives, because doing nothing means we will, at the moment, by law, need a deal. The one he keeps suggesting is revoking. Is that because we could seek an extension if this House by then has some idea of what it's seeking an extension for, but the EU might refuse it? Is he prepared to contemplate, is it the government's position, that if the EU refuses an extension, we will revoke it, no doubt with the intention of invoking it later once this Parliament and the government have decided what it is we're seeking for our future?
Well, the Father of the House makes an important point, but what we cannot do is revoke Article 50 and then invoke it later. The European Court of Justice has made that absolutely clear. That is why we need to come to a decision. No. I will give way to the honourable lady.
State for giving way. If the government is serious about engaging with alternatives to the deal that we voted on last night and serious about listening, why won't the government grant a series of indicative votes as recommended by the Exiting the EU Select Committee, which I sit on, my honourable friend chairs? Why won't the government do that to determine the will of the House?
The honourable lady makes an important point. I think that depending on how the House votes today, we may have an opportunity to vote on that proposition tomorrow. But one of the things that I think is important is that we, as quickly as we possibly can, find consensus. Now, one of the...
Joanna Cherry. Mr. Speaker, I think the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Secretary of State, has got confused between the ruling of the Court of Justice and the preliminary opinion of the Advocate General. It was the preliminary opinion of the Advocate General which suggested that once Article 50 was revoked, it couldn't be implemented again, whereas the Court of Justice's opinion does not say that. Now, Mr. Speaker, given that this is a judgment of the highest court in Europe, how can I put the record straight as the Secretary of State seems to have misunderstood the judgment?
Perhaps attempted point of order suffered from the material disadvantage of not being a point of order. The Honourable and Learned Lady has made her point. Legal exegesis as between a court and an Advocate General is not a matter for the chair, and I would go so far as to say that it is well beyond my limited capabilities. I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for elevating me to a level of prowess that I cannot profess. Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It was very revealing of the Scottish National Party's position. They want to be in and then out, in the same way as they want to be in the European Union but out of the common fisheries policy. We now know that the SNP are the hokey-cokey party. In, out, shake it all about. No. I think we've had more than enough. I think we've had more than enough from the collection of circus acts of the Scottish National Party.
The Honourable Gentleman is a distinguished member of the House of Commons Commission, and I hope, therefore, his point of order is authentic and genuine. Point of order, Mr. Stewart-Hosey.
As authentic as almost everybody else's. Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State has just said we know what the SNP are, what they believe in, what their positions are. On a point of order, can I ask, how can the Secretary of State know that if he refuses to engage in debate? Instead simply behaves like a little primary school bully, refusing to take proper engagement, hiding behind the big boys who are sitting behind him.
Secretary of State is invested with psychic powers. I have no way of knowing. I'm about to say to the honourable gentleman, though, in my dealings with the Secretary of State, I've never regarded him in any way as a bully. He is sometimes insistent upon his point of view, but I must say I've never found him remotely pressurising. Dealing with him isn't difficult at all. Secretary of State.
Thank you very much for that generous encomium, Mr. Speaker. I'm always happy to debate the SNP. What I'm not happy to do is to allow the time of this House, when there are so many other serious speakers who want to make their points, to be absorbed by repetitious and self-serving chicanery from the representatives on those benches. Now, I wanted to turn to one other proposition that has been put forward as an alternative, and that is the position of the official opposition, which isn't shaped by an amendment today, but is their policy, which is that we should be members of a customs union. But what is striking about the position that they put forward for the customs union is they say in that customs union we should be able to offer businesses state aid that we are not able to offer within the EU. Well, that would be illegal. They also say that we should have a voice in that customs union in the EU's negotiation of trade deals. Well, no such voice for any member of the customs union who's not a member of the EU exists. They also say that we should have independent trade remedies separate from those that the EU provides.
I'm sorry. I was very generous. I'll take the point of order. I was very generous to the Secretary of State. We all enjoy his rhetorical flourishes, and I'm not going to repeat the precise repeat the precise words, but he used a little formulation a moment ago which was very, very borderline as far as the procedures of this House are concerned. And I very gently say to him that what passes muster at the Oxford Union might not be acceptable in the chamber of the House. Point of order, Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It very much follows on from that. This is a debate about whether this House believes we should leave with no deal, and yet the Secretary of State has spent now quite some time discussing anything apart from that. I just wondered if we could get your advice about when this debate is actually going to go back onto the terms of the order paper.
Those addressing the House from the Treasury bench get a degree of latitude, but I do note what the Right Honourable Lady says, and I hope that contributions will focus on what the debate is supposed to be about, for if that were not to happen, there would have to be another debate on the matter in order to meet the terms of the commitment that has been given. And that might be inconvenient for some people, but that debate on that matter will take place. And about that, there need be no doubt on any bench, back or front. Secretary of State.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hope that I was able to outline earlier some of the real difficulties in leaving without a deal on March the 29th. It's perfectly open to members to take different views on that matter. But no. The motion, and I hope people will recognise that I've tried to take as many interventions as possible, but it is the case we must now move on in order to hear from the principal opposition spokesman, and of course to make sure that as many backbenchers as possible have their voice heard. No. But I think it's important that all of us in this House recognise that as a result of the vote last night, there are no easy options, no attractive choices left. I hope in the debate today and inevitably in the debate that follows tomorrow, we all take the responsibilities of representing our constituents as seriously as possible. We all need to recognise that leaving on March the 29th without a deal would impose economic, political and constitutional challenges and risks for this country, that I believe that we should undertake. I therefore think it is important that all of us work across this House and across old divisions to try to seek a consensus that can unite all 4 nations of the United Kingdom and can unite all our citizens in making sure that we honour the referendum mandate and we leave the European Union in a way that is economically sensible and democratically legitimate. And that is why I commend this motion to the House.